Welcome to Aging Insight with your host, John Ross and Lisa Schollmeyer. This program is made possible by
Welcome back to Aging Insight, everybody. I'm your host, John Ross, here with my partner and co-host, Lisa Schollmeyer, and we are elder law attorneys right here in your neck of the woods, and we try to devote our practice to the needs of a certain group of people who have concerns like avoiding nursing home care, concerns like avoiding going broke as they get older, and concerns like becoming a burden on their friends and family. You know, people don't want those things. They want to age on their own terms and independently. And Lisa and I, throughout our years of practice, have learned that you can accomplish those goals. But you've got to have knowledge. You've got to know how to navigate through this maze. And it can be a tricky one, especially when there's so many different laws and fact situations and scenarios, things that can pop up in your life that you just never expect. Well, one of those things that we're going to talk about today is disabilities. Whether we're talking about your own disability or whether we're talking about the disability of somebody that you love and care for. But, you know, in our Aging Insight magazine, Lisa has written an article in that magazine called Special Plans for Special People. And that article is about something called special needs trusts. And not a lot of people know about these sort of things.
Well, right, John, they are a bit of a complex legal beast, but they're a complex legal vehicle, but they simplify the outcome for anyone who is disabled and happens to be a beneficiary of an estate plan. So, you know, a lot of times I tell people we're not looking necessarily for the most simplified, solution, or we're looking for the simple outcome. You know, what comes out on the other end is understandable and is helpful. So.
So let me give you a fact scenario. So maybe you have a child who was born with a permanent disability, maybe cerebral palsy or Down syndrome. Maybe you have a child who was not born with any disabilities but has become disabled due to an injury or a health event. Or, you know, one of the things that I've started seeing here in the last few years is that as my clients, many of them are getting really, really old. I've got them in their hundreds now. In fact, there was an article in the newspaper the other day about a lady who just turned 115. Well, the fact is, when you live to the ripe old age of 100 or 105 or 110, your children have also become old. And all of a sudden, they start having the same concerns that maybe you are about avoiding nursing home care. And so all of these, the one thing that many of these people have in common, whether we're talking about this child with cerebral palsy, whether we're talking about this middle-aged adult who was paralyzed because of a car accident, or whether we're talking about an older person who maybe had a stroke at 55 or 60, many of these people are going to become eligible for need-based government assistance.
Well, and that's right, John, because, you know, if you become disabled and you cannot work, at some point or another, and you will qualify for some need-based assistance. And this is the type of assistance when you've gone through all of your assets and, you know, you can't really make enough money to, support yourself. You know, eventually the assets that you had built up at the time of your disability are going to dwindle and they're going to be used up. So, nearly everyone who becomes disabled, unfortunately, comes to a point where they need the support of our government benefit programs that are designed specifically for the disabled, the problem lies in that the amount of assets that you expend, or rather, I guess, the amount of assets that you can still have and qualify for these benefit programs is tiny. It's very, very small. For many benefit programs that support the disabled, the maximum amount of assets that a disabled person can have to their name is about $2,000. And John, you spoke a moment ago about that middle-aged person. Just met with a lady this week. She's 60 years old, had a stroke. She had been a hospital administrator, and
Right.
and now she cannot work. And they've been going through her retirement and her assets, and we're really at a point where she needs those support programs, and she never thought she would need those kind of programs.
That's right. So this can really affect anybody, and whether you're talking about a very restrictive benefit like SSI, which limits you to $2,000 in assets and $700 and I think about $58 a month in income, very restrictive, or some of the other programs that are less restrictive, like government-assisted housing under, say, the HUD program, which you can have a little bit more in assets, maybe $5,000 or $6,000, but a lot of times those benefits are what is putting food on the table. It's what's putting a little cash in the pocket. It's what's putting a roof over the head of, and it may be what's treating the medical conditions
That's right.
for that disabled person. So their access to these benefit programs is extremely important. Now, if that's the case, and you, being generous and loving, you think, well, my son or a grandchild who has these special needs, well, you know what? When I die, I ought to leave them a little something. Well, what do you think happens to all of those benefit programs when they receive that inheritance or that gift that all of a sudden now has put them up over those limits? And all of a sudden your generosity has caused a catastrophe. Well, we have a solution. Of course, we're going to take a break because that's how we do things. So we're going to take a break, and we're going to talk about the solution to all of this when we come back. So stick around with us. We'll be right back.
All our moments should be cherished. SEMA Hospice provides comfort care when you need it most with compassion, dignity, and respect. Along with Jordan Health Services, SEMA Hospice provides compassionate continuity of care. SEMA Hospice, comfort and care when it matters most.
As things get older, they require more care. This car and I have seen a lot of miles together, but because I take care of her, she runs just like she did in 1955. That's why I chose the Wadley Senior Clinic, with an individualized care plan designed just for me and a convenient location off Jefferson Avenue. They have everything to keep me running like new. It's not about the miles, it's about the journey. Let the Wadley Senior Clinic keep you happy, healthy, and cruising down the road of life.
Off of McKnight Road in Texarkana, Texas, the Oaks Independent are apartments for seniors who love secure peace of mind and consistency in their lives. You're going to fall in love with this newly built luxurious residential establishment for the aging adult. All bills are included and all apartments are wheelchair accessible, inclusive with all the amenities. Live in style, comfort, and accessibility. Live independent. Call today to schedule a tour. The Oaks Independent.
Hi there, I'm Larry Sims. It's been my privilege for the past several years to be a volunteer board member of Hospice of Texarkana, and there I'm able to represent community members like you. We continually customize our end-of-life care to better meet the needs of our community. As an example, our medical director and nurse practitioner still make visits to homes and facilities. Call today to learn more about the help we can give your family. Hospice of Texarkana, the nonprofit hospice established in 1985 for the community, by the community.
From our first moments to our final days, life's journey should be remembered free of burden and worry. Families should be cherished. SEMA Hospice provides comfort, care, dignity, and respect. Learn more about SEMA Hospice at SEMAHospice.com. SEMA Hospice, comfort and care when it matters most.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer, and I'm here with John Ross, and we are elder law attorneys. And today we're talking about special plans for special people. And we're talking about those beneficiaries of your generosity or estate that might be handicapped or have some disabilities. And, a lot of people say, well, we don't have anyone in the family that's got a permanent disability, such as muscular dystrophy or some of the things that, you're born with or that develop in childhood. But we're seeing more and more where the oldest member of the family, as they're doing their estate planning, they have concerns because their adult children who are middle-aged themselves are disabled for some reason at this point. And so now we're starting to think about, how do we leave assets behind for those children like we always intended to do, but yet not devastate the type of assistance that may be very vital to the well-being of that child. You don't want to put those type of benefits at risk through your generosity. And there's a tool that we use to make this happen, and it's a tool, and it's referred to as a special needs trust. And sometimes it's called a supplemental needs trust. And John, I really almost like the name supplemental needs trust better than the special needs trust.
Well, it's more descriptive as to what the trust does.
Right. So let's call it a supplemental needs trust.
So if we're going to talk about a supplemental needs trust, essentially what we're talking about is a trust. And again, if you've followed our other programs, you know that all trusts have three things in common: the person who creates it, which typically in this case is that parent or whoever is planning for this other disabled person. You have the beneficiary, which of course in this case is the disabled person, and then you have the trustee, and that's the person who's in charge of all of this. But a supplemental needs trust is designed so that the assets that are in the trust can be used to supplement that beneficiary's other government resources. So it supplements them, but it does not supplant them. In other words, they have access to these funds in a way that they can both keep their government assistance program benefits and have a pot of resources that can be used to provide for all of the things that the government doesn't pay for. Lisa, when I was in the Marines, they used to say, "John, I don't know what you're complaining about. You got 3 hots and a cot."
Right, the basic bare necessities.
Well, I'm here to tell you that there's more to life than 3 hots and a cot. And that's where something like a supplemental needs trust can come in.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of our disabled individuals, they have, maybe they've already used up any assets they may have saved up for themselves prior to their disability, and they really are, if you exist on a government program, it's a very meager existence. And, I recognize that there's a lot of stories out there about abuse of such programs, but you know what? We're not really going to address that today, because what we're addressing is happening right inside your family. And I bet if you're planning for someone who has some disabilities, you understand their circumstances, and we want to, provide a little more than what those basic government programs provide. For instance, John, you were talking a moment ago about some disabled persons have access to some housing type benefits.
Right.
Well, that's your shelter.
Right.
But that housing benefit, likely does not include furnishings.
Right. Or cable television.
Or internet access.
Internet access. A lot of the things that really we talk about, like the quality of life, the things that actually make life worth living. Because you're low income and disabled, you might be eligible for, say, food assistance in the form of something like Meals on Wheels, which is a great program. But just because you're paralyzed or because you were born with a disability, it's great that there's a program like Meals on Wheels out there, but you might still like a Whataburger.
Right. You still might like to go out to eat once or twice every now and then.
And so, when you're thinking about leaving assets behind, most people, when they're talking about making a bequest to somebody, whether it's a child or somebody else, they want it to be for that person so that they can enjoy it and that it will improve their quality of life. But when you've got a beneficiary that would lose access to these government programs if they receive that benefit, there's really no other choice but to use this special needs trust so that those assets don't affect that eligibility but can provide this quality of life. They can go out to dinner, they can have internet access, or maybe they can even buy the medical equipment that's available but not provided for.
Right, because that's certainly a situation, a lot of these disability government programs provide the most basic of needs, which could mean, for instance, a basic manual wheelchair. If we have a person that has some strength issues, maybe a mechanical or motorized wheelchair meets their needs and improves their quality of life. They can actually get out and get around.
Absolutely.
If they have that device as opposed to the provided, manual wheelchair. So that is a perfect example of how you leaving assets in a supplemental needs trust will improve that beneficiary's life.
Yeah, because once again, we're supplementing what the government program is providing. They might provide the mechanical wheelchair. The trust then can supplement so that we can upgrade to something that really fits that beneficiary's needs. So again, a great tool out there to protect these sort of things.
Yeah, and another one of the cautions here is, a lot of people, they want to provide those assets to that disabled individual, and maybe talking about a supplemental needs trust feels too complex for them. But here's something else to consider. Many times a person who now has access to some disability benefits through government programs, that access did not happen overnight. And oftentimes it is definitely a long process to be approved for those benefits. And just passing as little as $5,000 in assets to that disabled individual outside of a supplemental needs trust could result in that person being dropped from those disability programs, and then they have to reapply and start at the beginning again and journey through that process of qualifying for those benefits. And oftentimes, a small gift that drops them off these programs, it doesn't last long enough to make a difference. And in a month it's gone, and now we're on a 6, 8 month, 12 month reapplication period. So that's a big concern.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take another break, but when we come back, you may be thinking to yourself, well, John, I just don't have anybody in my family. We're all perfectly healthy, happy adults, no disabilities, none of that. So I don't know that the special needs trust stuff that you're talking about applies. Well, it applies to everybody. And when we come back from this break, we'll explain why. So stick around.
With my dad, it was in a hospital setting. And in his situation, he fell into renal failure. He also helped us make the decision to be on hospice. I have to admit, it took a huge weight off our shoulders for him to be willing. That offered us a lot of comfort, along with the hospice company itself, but it gave us closure, and it helped us through the entire process.
SEMA Hospice, comfort and care when it matters most.
As things get older, they require more care. This car and I have seen a lot of miles together, but because I take care of her, she runs just like she did in 1955. That's why I chose the Wadley Senior Clinic with an individualized care plan designed just for me and a convenient location off Jefferson Avenue. They have everything to keep me running like new. It's not about the miles, it's about the journey. Let the Wadley Senior Clinic keep you happy, healthy, and cruising down the road of life.
Welcome back to Aging Insight. I'm Lisa Scholmeyer, and I'm here with my partner and co-host, John Ross. And today we're talking about a tool that we use to pass assets to a disabled person. And the name of that tool is a supplemental needs trust. And John, this type of tool is very obvious to someone who may have raised a disabled child, or who has adults in their family.
The utility of it, certainly.
Right. But what about the example you were talking about before the break, where we have a family who feels like, well, there's not really anyone in our family that this applies to, so I'm going to turn the channel. We don't need to talk about that.
Right. Well, let me give you an example, and let's just talk about maybe a husband and wife. You're both healthy, happy adults. You've got 3 healthy, happy adult kids, and everything is fine today. But one of the big mistakes that I see people make is planning based on the circumstances that exist right now and not anticipating how things can go wrong in the future. So for example, I'm the head of the board of directors for the Alzheimer's Alliance. And one of the statistics that I point out a lot of times is that if a spouse is diagnosed with Alzheimer's, the person with the disease has a 10 to 15 year life expectancy. But the life expectancy of their spouse dwindles to a mere 3 years. And that's because it's so hard being the caregiver of somebody with Alzheimer's. So imagine the scenario. Here you've got what I call the I love you wills. I leave everything to you, or you leave everything to me, and when we both die, we leave everything to the kids. What most people would call a simple will, which may all be fine and dandy, except now maybe mom has got Alzheimer's, and the reason she's at home and not in a nursing home is because dad is there to care for her. Well, as I just mentioned, dad's life expectancy from the stress of being a caregiver has shortened. And if dad dies, leaving mom with no caregiver, she might need nursing home care, which can easily run $4,000 to $6,000 a month. What if instead dad's estate planning said, yeah, I leave everything to my wife, but if at the time of my death my wife is unable to care for herself, then instead of going to her directly, I would like it rerouted into a supplemental needs trust for her benefit. Now, that spouse has really done a lot to protect their loved one.
Well, right, and that spouse has done a lot to protect the quality of life for that person they might leave behind due to their own death. And that's really the biggest concern for most people. Most people I talk to that are caring for a disabled individual, that's their biggest fear, that that disabled individual outlives them. And by doing some planning that takes into account that it's quite possible through a health crisis such as a stroke, or maybe something that's a little more longer such as an Alzheimer's diagnosis, it's quite possible for any of us to deal with that disability either as a caregiver or a sufferer of that incident. So we need to consider those plans and to make them while we can, because opportunities do get lost along the way, and sometimes we can't go back and fix it.
That's right. So, whether you're, if you have a person in the family with a known disability that is already receiving these sort of benefits, then the use of a supplemental needs trust is a no-brainer. It's just a got to have for that person. But for everybody else, the use of a contingent special needs trust, that I love you will that I mentioned a second ago, I leave everything to you, you leave everything to me, and when we both die, we leave everything to the kids. it says just exactly that. But then after that it says, but if any one of these individuals would be negatively affected by the receipt of this inheritance, whether it's the spouse, whether it's one of the kids, if they become disabled, then their share could get redirected into a special needs trust. So building in the supplemental needs trust as a contingency to plan for the just in case.
Right. Well, and you know, if all this makes your head spin, you know, just know that there's a tool out there that you can use to plan for that disabled person or for the potential for a disabled person. But I will say this: these are not cookie cutter type. This is not a cookie cutter type of tool that you can jump on the internet and, you know, print one off. These are very sophisticated type of documents, because if you think about it, you know, we have to jump through a lot of hoops to make sure the trust assets are preserved for that disabled person, but yet are accessible for that disabled person. And so there's a lot of details that have to be attended to. So, you know, you need to consult professionals who are familiar with this type of planning.
Absolutely. And the one thing please don't do is don't throw up your hands and say, oh, well, that's just all too complicated. So, you know, I've got 3 kids, one of them has a disability, so I'm just going to cut them out altogether and leave everything to their brother and sister with instructions that they take care of their little brother.
Yeah.
That is such a bad idea that I cannot enumerate the many reasons
just speechless.
and ways that can go wrong. Yeah. And yet I have seen so many people do it. You don't have to disinherit somebody with disabilities. Use the supplemental needs trust. It's a great tool.
Yeah, you know, and so we've come to the end of another edition of Aging Insight, and I hope that from today's episode you took from it that, you know, disability is something that needs to be planned for, and, you know, take the time, do it now. But make sure you do it, because the consequences of not doing it could be very devastating on the disabled individual.
That's right. And if you have any more questions, you can always reach us live every Saturday on 107.1. That's our Aging Insight Talk radio show, where you can call in and ask questions. And of course, you can find us on the internet at aginginsight.com. So thanks for sticking around, and we'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this week's Aging Insight program with John Ross and Lisa Scholmeyer. This program is made possible by